Okay, so part 3, winners and losers of climate change. So when we think about coral bleaching, that picture I showed you where every coral was bleached is really not very common. What we normally see is something that looks like this. So you have a situation where there's some bleached individuals, and then there's other individuals that look fine. And this is really common. So this is something that my lab is really interested in, is why do some corals bleach and others don't? So it's something that we're actively trying to understand. But when we think about coral bleaching, there's winning species. So this is an example where you have three corals that are from 3 different species living in the same habitat, and one of them is totally fine, one of them is partially bleached, and one of them is fully bleached. So this is really interesting. That means that certain species may be more resilient to climate change than others. This is another example. This is in the Florida Keys after a cold water bleaching event. So sometimes corals don't like the cold as well. So this is one species. This is an endangered species before the cold water bleaching event. This is after it's dead and covered in macroalgae. This is another species. It's called the mustard hill coral. This is what it looks like healthy. It's not even that cute healthy, really. But then it becomes bleached and kind of covered in sediment after this event, but it's still alive. And this is one of our lab's favorite corals. It's called Siderastra siderea, this massive starlet coral, I believe. This is it before, and then after it actually looks even better. So the reason we study this coral is because we're really interested in understanding why is it so resilient. We call it the Superman or the honey badger. We also see that within a species, there's winning individuals. So certain individuals within the same species can perform well, while others perform not so well. It's the same thing when you think about who gets the flu. It's not like every single person gets the flu. There's variation, and there's variation in corals too. So this is looking at a coral reef. These are the same species, and you see that some individuals are totally fine, and other ones are really bleached. So this is another thing we're trying to understand. What is with this variation within species, and what can we understand about those individuals that don't bleach that might help us help corals? Okay, there we go. This is another example, 2 individuals from the same species, right side by side. One is totally happy, and the other one is really bleached. And this is our favorite honey badger coral, Siderastra siderea. This is an experiment we did, and this is a happy coral. This is what they look like. They're kind of purple. This one turned a really interesting, weird pink phenotype that we still don't quite understand. And then there's these 2 individuals that bleached, and why. So we're still trying to understand that, but you see this sort of variation within a species amongst corals. Oops. Yeah. No, sorry. Yes. We also see that certain individuals are very resilient as far as recovery. So you can see that this individual in 2017 bleached really badly, and then when you went back in 2018, it was fully recovered. So we're really interested in why certain corals can recover and other ones die. All right, so there's also winning coral reefs. So yay, there's some reefs that are just for whatever reason, they're very resilient. Not like those ones I showed you from the last one, those ones aren't. But this is an example of North Reef on the Great Barrier Reef. This is what it looked like in 2006, beautiful, fully covered in corals. There was a massive bleaching event here in 2010. In 2012, we started to see some evidence, some small little individuals that were growing, and now in 2014, or I guess this is 4 years ago now, but fully covered. And in fact, the coral cover was higher than it was to start. So we see this happening sometimes, so it's not all Debbie Downer. So I think there's no question that corals will persist. But when we think of coral reefs and we think about the things that are happening to them, they're getting hotter waters and more acidic waters, what's going to happen? I think that remains a question that we're all trying to understand, and really we can't predict the future. But I think that most coral biologists would agree that reefs will be there, but they're going to be fundamentally different than how we know them today. So really, I don't think corals are going to go fully extinct, but I think that reefs will be different, they will function different, and they will be fundamentally different. So the other cool thing that's happening right now is there's a ton of restoration efforts. So this is some example of some restoration efforts happening in the Seychelles. This is some happening in Japan. I thought this was really novel looking. I just Googled restoration. This is some happening in Belize. This is actually, there's someone in the audience that participated in this, Les. So this is Fragments of Hope in Belize. So they're culturing 2 of the highly endangered species in the Caribbean, the staghorn coral and the elkhorn coral. And this is what's happening in Florida. This is also part of the coral reef, this thing. Coral Restoration Consortium. So this is actually really cool. 10% of the proceeds from today's concert are actually going to this consortium. And both myself and Les in the audience are both members of this. We're active participants, and we're trying to help give coral reef managers better information on how to best preserve their reefs that they have, and then how to really target their restoration efforts to make the most reasonable progress given the scenario that we're in. But when we really think about winners and losers, the real losers are us. The real losers are humans, because corals are so important. So corals are economically important. When we think about storms, the front lines in the tropics of what the storms hit first are coral reefs. You remove that, and you've essentially removed your defense barrier. So they're wildly important and we think that this is actually one of the reason the storms have been had such bad impact in the Florida Keys is because there isn't that barrier anymore. Those reefs are gone. So really, from an economic standpoint, reefs are really important. They're also really important for scuba diving. This actually brings in a ton of money when we think about Florida Keys. People go to Florida to go diving. People go to the Caribbean and go diving. People go to the Great Barrier Reef and go diving. It costs like $150 a day. Like, people are making bank off coral reefs. They're also really important for fisheries. So a ton of fish are produced on reefs. So there's a lot of economics as far as fisheries on coral reefs. There's also ecological things that we're missing out if we don't have reefs. So the first is other animals that rely on reefs, like charismatic megafauna. Everybody loves charismatic megafauna. Turtles, sharks, whale sharks. Come on, I mean, seriously, if there's no reefs, there's no charismatic megafauna. I mean, just like, that's why we go diving. We want to see manta rays and eagle rays and, some scary shark that we think we want to see until we see it. They're also really important for the food web. So we think of them as the bottom of the food web. They're kind of like the trees in the rainforest. So they provide all of the homes for all of the millions of organisms that live on reefs. And they're photosynthesizing, so they're primary producers. So they're super important as far as food web dynamics. And they're also important for larval fish. So a ton of larval fish live on reefs. So really, from a standpoint of fisheries, this is like a double whammy. And societal impacts. So the first is drugs. A lot of cool things found on reefs. There's like millions of organisms with tons of genes that we don't even understand yet. We don't even know all of the things that live on reefs, and they're just dying, and we've probably lost species we didn't even know ever did exist. So from a drug standpoint, there's probably a lot of novel exploration to do. Culturally, reefs are really important for island communities and people that live along coastlines. Reefs play a really important role in culture. And for everyone in the room, probably corals have some sort of intrinsic value. So this is something that we can't really put a number on, but all of you are here probably because you find some sort of intrinsic value for corals. So one last thing I wanted to note is that there are free passes to the Museum of Science to see the Great Barrier Reef documentary. So if you didn't grab one, there may be some left at the front, so be sure to pop in. So I just wanted to make that note. Everybody loves a free pass. Okay, so here I have to turn around and actually read this. So what's really interesting about the timing of this event is that the brand new IPCC report just came out on October 8th. So I don't know it very well yet. I'm just trying to wrap my head around it. But it's essentially in response to the Paris Climate Agreement. So the Paris Climate Agreement happened in 2015, and it was adopted by 195 nations. So I'll read this out to you. The goal of the Paris Agreement is strengthening the global response to the threat of climate change by holding the increase in the global average temperature to well below 2 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels, and pursuing efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. So this is a really bold goal. It won't be easy. So what happened is that the IPCC went out and really tried to address the question, really, what's the big difference? Can we just go to 2 degrees, or is there a big difference as far as effects of climate change if we go to just 1.5? So really, what are the costs and benefits to doing 2 degrees versus 1.5? Because fiscally, it's going to be a lot harder to hit 1.5 than it will to hit 2. So this is what they came out with. So this is the response to global warming of 1.5. So this was a special report. Like I said, it just came out last week. It was really exciting. I'm trying to read it, but it's pretty intense. There's 91 authors and review editors from 40 countries that prepared the document, so it's a massive effort among scientists. And this is what they found. With clear benefits to people and natural ecosystems, limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade compared to 2 could go hand in hand with ensuring a more sustainable and equitable society. But, caveat, they also said this. Limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade would require rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented changes in all aspects of society. So really, it's like a big lift. And not even a big lift, it's just a huge lift to keep it at 1.5. Also, just in case anyone wants to know, there were 6,000 references. Pretty intense. So those people, those climate change deniers, 6,000 scientific references. It's good enough for me. So when we think about the Paris Agreement and where we stand in the United States of America, it's pretty embarrassing. We're one of 3 countries that have not either ratified or signed the Paris Climate Agreement. So obviously, we're a pretty big country. We have huge amounts of fossil fuels that we emit every year. We're a big contributor to climate change. So this is no good. So what can you do? I always get asked this. What can we do for reefs? What's the best thing you can do? Is it not wearing sunscreen on the reef? Is it not driving your car? Is it not flying anymore? Is it not using straws? Is it removing the microplastics from your face cream? The answer is all of those things probably help, but none of them are enough. None of them. We need massive policy change across the world. We need everyone on board with the Paris Climate Agreement. This isn't an option, it's a must. So when people ask me what's the best thing you can do, is you can make policy change by getting out and voting. Yeah. So I can't vote because I'm Canadian, but I'm working on it. But all of you can. But Canada signed on. And I know there's people in the room that aren't old enough to, but pretty soon you'll be 18 and you'll be able to vote too. And your vote matters and climate change matters, and it should be one of the major things that we think about when we're voting. We need people in DC that are fighting for dealing with climate change. This is the #1 threat, I think, not only to corals, but to us. So that's how I'm going to end it.